Okay, so this is a really interesting one this week that we're going to look at, which is a bit of an epidemic, which I don't think gets covered quite enough. And I find it maybe morbidly slow, slightly fascinating subject to look into. We're looking at ACL injuries, is what the subject we're looking at specifically in women's football. But it's a very interesting subject. Hang about to the midpoint of the video because we're going to get into the weeds a bit in terms of biomechanics. This is a specific thing I want to focus on. But let's get into this video.
It's really traumatic now, I think, because the first time round it was fine. I got myself back, and you just don't expect it to just keep happening to you, and just to have to be retiring at the age of 24 is just ridiculous. So, yeah, it's really hard to process. Sorry.
Quite tough to actually see Bo Parker talk about her experiences with ACL injury, and very crazy to think that she's 24 years old and she's had multiples of this injury. When you think that she should be in the kind of prime space almost of a athlete, and so these injuries and stuff shouldn't be as prevalent as they clearly are. And to also, as she talks about there in that short interview, the mental load that it is not to just go through, get the injury, go through the recovery, and then get yourself back to performance fit, but also the fact that this can happen again and has happened again, and then that leads to going back through it again and again, and that kind of mental pressure and anxiety of dealing with this kind of injury.
Particularly women. England star Michelle Adjeman, one of 8 WSL players this season to rupture their ACLs. But in the same time, only 3 male players from Premier League teams have suffered the same injury.
This fact here is actually kind of mind-blowing that in the space of 8 female players getting ACL injuries, only 3 male players in the Premiership top flight football in the male space is getting only 3 of them got ACL injuries in that same frame of time, meaning that women are 2 to 7 times more likely to get ACL injuries, and that is a mind-blowing fact. It's football. It's the same game. Obviously, there is going to be physicality differences and technical differences and tactical differences between these games. But what's interesting, and we're going to get into this, is why it is so prevalent for females to get this type of injury.
At Kingston University, with funding from FIFA, research is being run to find out why. The movements for master's student Jessica Nutman simulating a match are being captured by 3D motion cameras.
What we're looking at here is the different stages of the menstrual cycle and how that leads to ACL risk and damage. We've also got different biology, basically, different muscle, different limbs, different sizes. So it's good to look at each individual gender and just see how that would have an effect.
This is also a really key thing that she mentioned here, that women compared to men when we're studying, they have a different biology, a different muscles, different joint loading, different movement. They have a hormonal difference, a significant hormonal difference than men, and how that menstrual cycle affects things like injuries and how looking at that can then look at injury prevention. So it's actually something very interesting to look at. One of the things I'm going to focus on in a second is going to be the biomechanics, the specific of that, as that's more my area of expertise. But it is interesting to note these other changes in terms of like the menstrual cycle and women's biology being so different to men's when it comes to how to prevent injury in sport.
We'll be looking at some key variables related to the movement patterns, to the joint loadings that we're seeing.
Okay, so this next bit is the bit I really want to focus on when we start to talk about the biomechanics and how force moves through the body, and more importantly, where it goes.
That could mean changing strength training, working on different playing techniques, or looking at whether footwear or pitches are the problem.
Okay, so here is something I really wanted to focus on, and the main part of this video is we're going to talk about hip flexion. And no, this isn't just about the ability to lift the knee up. What we're really talking about here is the pelvis, the rib cage, the femur, and that interaction under load. Now, when athletes cut, decelerate, change direction, they need the ability to access true hip flexion. So what does that really mean? That means when we're talking about the femur, it needs to be able to move back and around in its socket. The pelvis needs to the ability to posteriorly tilt, and the rib cage needs the ability to be able to stack over that pelvis as well. So you have this nice, neat stacking of pelvis and rib cage. But here is what we often see instead when athletes don't have this ability to stack the pelvis. You see them more anteriorly tilted in the pelvis, you see the rib cage flared and forward, and you see the athlete can't access true hip flexion. So what happens when they can't access true hip flexion is they borrow this motion from somewhere else. The body will find a way to compensate. That somewhere else is usually the knee. Now, instead of the hip being able to absorb the force, the femur drives forward, internally rotates without control, and the knee collapses into the valgus. That's not just a strength issue, that's a positional problem. And here is where it gets even more interesting, because what controls the rib cage position and what controls the pelvis position? If an athlete is stuck in this high extended chest breathing pattern, then the rib cage stays flared, the pelvis stays tipped forward, they lose the ability to get into hip flexion under load. So when they sprint, they cut, they decelerate, they're not using the hip properly. They're falling into the knee, and so then over time, that load has to go somewhere.
There's so much work to do in women's sport generally, research-wise, because so much of the research that exists has been done in men's sport or on men and boys, and so there is a gap. We are working really hard with other partners to fill that gap.
And this is often the problem in when we do research. A lot of it is done for men and boys, and there is a gap in that knowledge for females and female athletes. So it is something that we need to expand on, that we are pretty bad on in terms of research. I'm glad to see that the FA and people are pushing towards getting that research done so we can better understand it. One thing that I think is interesting to understand is that they're looking at things like pitch quality, shoes, all this kind of stuff is going to aid in compensating for any compensations that already exist in the body. So you're compensating for the compensation when really you can drill down to the foundation of the biomechanics and improving those through things like breathing. Maybe breathing's not the be all and end all. I mean, obviously I'm a big component for that, and to push that as a way of actually helping. The literature is there to back that up as well, obviously. So it's a good idea to look at pitches and shoe wear and stuff like that, but we also need to be looking at the foundational problems and addressing those through improving those biomechanics.
I want to know what I can do to prevent it from happening again. Obviously, I understand injuries happen all the time, but it's also just the process of the rehab. This is
a very key point here right at the end from Bo, is that athletes are result driven. So they just want to know what they can do to prevent these kinds of injuries, to prevent their occurrence of injuries, not just ACL, but in general, keep themselves fit and healthy and playing at their best. Breathing mechanics, breathing biochemistry, the psychophysiological aspects that breathing can help with, help in all these areas. They help you to perform better, they help you to have better stamina, better movement, they help the psychological stress, the anxieties, the mental load that you are taking as an athlete. Breathing encompasses all of these. So this is why I really do believe that employing a breathing coach, maybe I'm not the right coach for you, maybe someone else is, but employing a breathing coach or someone that has a good, deep knowledge in how breathing works in terms of the biomechanics, the biochemistry and psychophysiological aspects, and can employ them into your training. I'm a big believer as a coach that this shouldn't go on top of your training. This should be a add-on to your training and tweaks to your training. There's loads of stuff you can do. There's loads of stuff I do with clients where we're not adding to their training load, their training week, but we're adding into it and getting loads of value out of it. For this reason, but I really do believe that breathing and employing breath training in your program as an athlete will help with these things, such as injury prevention, such as the mental load from having injuries, coming back from injuries, etc. So yeah, I think this is a really interesting video. It is an epidemic in terms of that women are so likely to get ACL injuries compared to men. It's an interesting subject, as morbid as that is to say, but the more light we shine and the more research we do, the better these results come for these athletes, and they can keep performing at their best and doing what they love. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. Make sure to do all that good stuff, like, share, subscribe before you go. It helps the channel out and it costs absolutely nothing. So please do that, or consider doing that before you go. And I'll see you on next video. And if not, I'll see you in the comment section.